My name is Ariana Kresniak. I'm a student at the Lausanne School of Engineering, and this summer I've been researching liquid transfer bridges with Professor Alidad Amr-Fazli. The goal of this research has been to find characteristics that can be used to predict how much volume will be transferred across a liquid bridge when it breaks. For context, a liquid bridge is when you have a droplet stretched between two surfaces. To conduct this research, we made an experimental setup that involves a pedestal with a surface on top of that. We call this the donor surface. We have a second surface that we call the acceptor surface that's connected to an electric motor and suspended above. A droplet is placed on the donor surface, and the acceptor is advanced until it makes contact with the droplet, pauses, and then retracts very slowly, at about 1 millimeter a second. This whole thing is backlit and then filmed with a high-speed camera. Now, it's very important that we retract the surface slowly, because this puts the bridge into a quasi-static state. And this means that from one instant to another, as the bridge evolves, there's no appreciable flow internal to the droplet. Any flow needed to change the shape of the bridge is indistinguishable from the net motion already occurring in the particles of the fluid. Now, by removing flow, it simplifies our problem because it removes things like viscosity. So it simplifies it down to just capillary forces of surface tension and Laplace pressure, and gravitational forces. Initially, our hypothesis was that at a higher volume, gravity would be much stronger than the capillary forces, but as the volumes decreased, the role of gravity would be reduced, until it's cancelled out entirely by the capillary forces. This should result in an ideal transfer ratio of about 50% when the gravitational forces have been completely cancelled out. To test this, I performed the experiment, as I explained, and produced over 300 videos. I controlled for the volume, with my largest volume being about 6 microliters, and the smallest droplet volume being about 1/4 of a microliter. I also controlled for the contact angle of the bridge. Now, contact angle is the angle between the surface of the droplet and the surface that the droplet rests on. It's unique to each triple point, which is when two fluids meet a solid. So in this case, that's my solid surface, my liquid droplet, and the gaseous atmosphere around it. By using distilled water and conducting the experiment in the same lab atmosphere, I can control the contact angle by treating the surface with different coatings. It's important to note here that while the contact angle is unique to each triple point, it's actually a unique range called the hysteresis. This means that the droplet or bridge can take a stable shape with a contact angle in that range. But if it attempts to take an angle outside the hysteresis range, the radius of the area of the bridge will change instead. That's the radius that it contacts the surface at. So if it attempts to take an angle that will be lower than the range, the radius of contact will reduce. And so the lower boundary is called the receding contact angle. And if it attempts to take an angle that's higher than the boundary, the contact radius will increase. So it's called the advancing contact angle. I used 3 coatings in my experiments: polymethyl methacrylate, PMMA, polyethyl methacrylate, PEMA, and trichlorooctahydroisosilane, OTS. And this is because the receding angle was the one we were concerned with. And so PMMA has a receding angle of about 55 degrees, PEMA has a receding angle of about 63 degrees, and OTS has a receding angle of about 80 degrees. What I found was that as the volume decreased, the transfer ratio did increase, but with wide variability. This can be seen in my plots of transfer percentage by the initial volume. This is because the contact hysteresis is unique to every triple point, and differences between the contact angle of the donor surface and the acceptor surface cause variability in the transfer percentage. It's most sensitive and has the biggest impact the smaller the difference between the angles. Now that sounds counterintuitive, but what it is that by increasing the difference between them, it has a diminishing return on the impact against it. So we were operating in the most sensitive range by trying to have the same surfaces on either side. Our findings do support our hypothesis, but because of that sensitive range, it leaves a lot of room for error. So my research is still ongoing. Our next examination is to perform calculations of the force balance of the bridge at any instant in its evolution, so that we can double check and ensure that our initial assumptions that limit our force balance are correct, or so that we can identify what additional forces we haven't considered. But the final question that I'm always asked is, why? And this is because liquid transfer bridges are used in the efficiency of things like printing presses. They're used when picking up very fine components in a nanoscale of manufacturing. And they also occur in the water retention of soil. And this is because these bridges form between particles in the soil. And it's this last one that I think is particularly interesting, because this leads to an example that everyone can relate to, and that's sandcastles. Dry sand falls apart because there's no liquid bridges holding the particles together. Really wet sand is oversaturated, and so no bridges can form. But just enough water means that the sand is strengthened by capillary forces and makes for an excellent castle. So it gives me something that I can really relate my work to as I keep going.